Avery, whose show is this? And we're live. Welcome, everybody, here to the Lakers Lounge Podcast. I'm Anthony Irwin, Senior Lakers Insider for Clutch Points. And today on the show, we have a bunch actually to talk about. We have the latest on the Clippers. I spoke to some of the people that I speak to around the league about this, and everybody has an opinion on it. I'll give you, kind of the rundown of that, as well as some of the coverage of the situation, which I have found kind of interesting as well. So we'll talk about that. Cam Johnson actually signed or Cam Thomas. It was Cam Thomas, right? I'm sorry, Cam. I hope that I have this. Let me just double check. It was Thomas, so I will change that on the rundown. But Cam Thomas signed his qualifying offer, which I find very interesting and very notable for the league kind of moving forward. The Lakers have a better player. I think Austin is quite a bit better, at least more impactful than Cam is. But he has free agency coming up. Now it's unrestricted, but yeah, I think there's some ties to make there. So we'll talk about that situation. In an effort seemingly to get everybody to not talk about the Clippers yesterday, the league leaked to Shams Charania about the all-star format, which I found all of that really funny, including the format. So we'll discuss that as well. So with all of that said, and without any further ado, let's go ahead and dive on in. All right. For first and foremost, please, to those of you watching here live, please hit that subscribe button. Please hit that like button. Both of those buttons really, really help us. To those of you who are watching on Twitter, head on over to youtube.com/@LakersLounge to find the show there. To those of you who are listening to this in podcast form, please hit subscribe wherever it is that you get your podcast, preferably on Odyssey, because I'm a company man. And then finally, tell your friends about the show. Tell your friends that your friends and your loved ones that you love the show. Tell your hated ones that you hate this, that it's a terrible, terrible show, filled with some of the worst jokes you can ever imagine. And maybe they'll tune in too. But yeah, let's go ahead and start with the latest on the Clippers drama, which there isn't necessarily anything new from a news standpoint. But I do think some of the last, 24 hours or so have been fairly telling in a few different ways. So obviously, news drops yesterday. And for the rest of that day, just kind of sat back and listened to those people who reached out to me, obviously had those conversations, but I didn't really do much reaching out to people. For one thing, because I just don't feel like I'm important enough to for people to answer their phones for. But then also, like, I just want to kind of say, like, Harrison and I were going to do the show together. I didn't want too much sourced information to kind of get in the way of Harrison and I just kind of laughing at the ridiculousness of it all. But after the show, and then obviously for most of today, running up to right now while I'm live, been talking to some people and reaching out to some people just to see where they stand, where the league is at with this, and have been fairly surprised on some stuff. And then also, so I've said this a few times on the show. I don't really listen to very many NBA podcasts. And by very many, I mean basically none. I listen to the Odyssey Lakers shows. I listen to Jovan's, I listen to Pete's and Darius's, because that's kind of part of the gig, and I like both of those shows. But I basically try to stay out of national stuff, and I try to stay away from most shows, just from the standpoint of I never want to feel like I am ripping somebody else's opinion off. And in this case, though, I wanted to dip back in. And I wanted to see what various shows are kind of saying about this. And most notably, I think Zach Lowe had Kirk Goldsberry, who previously worked in the Spurs front office, and then obviously Zach Lowe is incredibly plugged in as well. So I basically, like, between listening to some other shows and seeing where everybody kind of sits from a media standpoint, and then with kind of checking in with the people that I check in with. It's also September, so most people are kind of like, but I was really surprised how many people were willing to talk about this, and their opinions, and the spectrum of opinions really kind of surprised me, where there were some people on one side of the end of the spectrum who were kind of saying, well, let's really pump the brakes here. Some of these allegations are very serious and it is very circumstantial evidence. Let's just kind of chill for a bit. Not saying it's not important, all that stuff. There were people who went even further to that end of the spectrum who were like, look, this is the NBA. There are billions of dollars on the line with some of these guys' decisions. Are we really that surprised that Steve Ballmer would go to the extent that he is had allegedly gone to? And then on the other side of the spectrum, there were people who were saying stuff like, yeah, it doesn't really surprise us when Adam Silver basically smacks Ballmer on the wrist, or doesn't do anything, or claims to have not found anything in an investigation the first time around when Uncle Dennis was making these crazy requests back in 2019. If you don't find anything then, and you make this big stink out of yeah, we didn't find anything, but if we hear about anything again, then we'll do something then. If that's like the extent of your your response to the first time around, and then there were other like slaps on the wrist with Ballmer on cap circumvention and tampering allegations as well. If you're basically show that you're unwilling to rein this dude in, then guess what he's going to keep on doing, right? Give him an inch, he's going to take $154 billion from you. And yeah, I think what it really kind of comes down to with the people on that side is like, all right, you gave this guy a chance to recognize, maybe he was new, and he didn't maybe necessarily understand how business is to be done on these things. Maybe he screwed up the one time, but it was kind of a it was just that. It was just a screw up. This time, though, now knowing what you're not supposed to do, and knowing kind of the extent to which other teams kind of go on these things, to basically like see that line in the sand, jump across it, pee on it, and then laugh at it as you walk by it. That's where these other people that I've been kind of talking to around the league, they're kind of saying like, all right, enough. The league really does have to act pretty severely this time around. Also of note, right? So Zach Lowe no longer with ESPN. I went and looked this morning on ESPN's main page at their news there, and was really kind of surprised that there was no mention of this story. And that Shams Charania, all of his tweets basically have been kind of relaying the Clippers statement. He did a Sports Center hit, I believe, where he said, what the league is going to have to find if they really want to punish Steve Ballmer, and showed a little skepticism that they would maybe necessarily find anything. Now, if you go to ESPN's NBA page, there is a headline there about this, and I clicked on it to see, how ESPN is kind of covering this. They are a corporate partner in this case, so that's worth mentioning as well. And it's also worth mentioning that if a traditional news outlet is going to cover something like this, they can't just quite aggregate stuff in the same way that, say, I do here on this podcast, or, blogs do in the blogosphere. So maybe ESPN is kind of working on their own reporting to see what's going on there. We do have to open up the possibility for that to be going on, but it's really kind of interesting that like 24 hours later, ESPN hasn't really added anything to the story. This is easily the biggest story in the sport right now. Absolutely dwarfs everything going on in the NBA. And like, yeah, you're kind of at the onset. Literally tonight, right, is the first NFL, proper NFL game. So maybe ESPN is kind of devoting most of their coverage to the NFL. Okay, but that doesn't mean that your NBA people can't be doing stuff. And it's going to be interesting to see, the Hoop Collective releases their podcast, I believe, tomorrow. So we'll see what they talk about, and if they talk about this, how they talk about it. But it was really odd, and it kind of reminded me of back when I reported that JJ Redick was going to be the head coach of the Los Angeles Lakers. And I don't want to go all the way into the weeds because I wind up sounding like I have, I'm some kind of crazy conspiracy theorist here. But, you know, Pat McAfee has Shams on his show in that moment, asks Shams about my report. I remember getting texts from friends who watch Pat's show, and they were like, dude, is that you? And I'm like, yeah, that's me. And Shams denied the report, right? Denied it, said he hadn't heard anything about that, and that the Lakers hadn't made any formal decisions or anything like that. When again, I knew, right? Like it was a done deal. And as you guys remember, I'll always kind of laugh at the way that you guys supported me in that moment, because a lot of you guys and a lot of my Twitter followers were like finding inconsistencies in some of the storytelling there, as they were kind of outlining the timeline of how JJ Redick was hired. And it wound up looking a lot like I had it when I had it. And the reason I say all of this is because what ESPN will sometimes do, especially like Shams is the most plugged in, like they want you to believe that Shams is the most plugged in person in NBA circles. And for the most part, he is, right? He's incredibly well plugged in. He's incredibly well informed. But to be that informed and to be able to break the amount of news that he breaks, there are some compromises that you sometimes have to make. And uh, if a source tells you, yeah, we're getting ready to do this, but hold off on it for whatever reason, you have to then hold off on it for that amount of time. Or if they say, hey, yeah, can we keep this a little bit quiet? We're still trying to work out like the realities of the situation. If you have that story, sometimes, as part of the information economy, you are kind of expected to hold off on some stuff. And then in some cases, as I saw last year and lived through firsthand, in some cases, you like last year, we had Shams kind of echoing a lot of, not echoing, he had it too. I'm not going to go that far, but I said at the onset of that JJ Redick search that the Lakers were hoping to be wowed by JJ Redick their in their interview process. And they also early on in that process, I think at the time I was reporting for Lakers Daily. I think early on in that process, I said that they kind of had zeroed in on JJ. I think that was a phrase that I used, but they were kind of they were hyper focused on JJ Redick in their hiring process. And I believe that exact phrase was used again by Shams. And again, like sources use the same phrasing, so I'm not saying that he was stealing it. I'm not going that far. This isn't the point of the story. The point of the story is that when I reported, the reality of the situation, then Shams and Woj were both able to kind of warp reality, right? Think like Thanos with the reality stone, where it's not something, it's not the truth until they say it's the truth. And what sometimes happens is if somebody has a story, and this is one of the flaws in the way that the NBA is kind of covered journalistically now. Um, there is no expectation that journalists cite other journalists' work. And I've even heard cases of some people, editors even, going in and removing citing of other people's work. Shouts to Pablo in this case, because he had this so thoroughly, and it's such a great story, and he has it so like nailed down apparently, that he is being cited in a lot of these podcasts, and it's good that he is. Um, but part of me thinks potentially that Shams isn't covering this because he didn't have it first. And if he doesn't cover it, and if ESPN doesn't cover it, you can kind of warp reality, and you could pretend the thing doesn't exist until you have your version of the story, and or a version of the story that your source is a little bit more comfortable with. So it's going to be interesting to see as this story of, I don't think it's going anywhere. There are too many people talking about it, whether it's in the podcast world, whether it's in NBA circles, whatever. I don't think this is going anywhere whatsoever. It's just too big a story. It's too important a story. And it's going to be interesting to see if it doesn't go anywhere, if Shams ever actually covers it. Another example, right, was when the center for Dallas signed his extension. Gafford signed his extension, and Mark Stein. So when he signed his extension, when Shams reported the extension, he said something to the tune of like, the extension is 3 years, $60 million. And if it was 3 years, $60 million, that would mean that Daniel Gafford couldn't be traded until like December. And Mark Stein of DLLS Sports, and then he obviously also has this really great Substack with Jake Fisher. He then reports, no, actually, the dollar amount is closer to like $54 million. And if it was at $54 million, Gafford could actually still be traded right away. At no point, and by the way, Stein's reporting wound up being correct. And at no point did ESPN or Shams ever correct their reporting. So if all you were paying attention to was Shams's reporting, you would think that Gafford can't be traded until December, when that actually isn't the case. And again, this is why, people give me a hard time on Twitter, because I always kind of push back against Shams being the only purveyor of information, and people only trusting Shams with their information. If you do that, you leave yourself open to to being duped, and to him getting stuff wrong, which happens all the time. You guys know I get shit wrong all the time too. And if I do, I try to explain how I got it wrong. I correct it as soon as I possibly can. And that way, if you guys are using my show as a predominant version of the of your kind of NBA outlook, if you're using that, especially the Lakers outlook, I'm trying to make it so that the information you get is as correct as I can possibly have it. That's my top priority. Whereas, sometimes I don't think that is necessarily his top priority. So just something to kind of to note here as this has been going on. Now let's get back to the actual story. Based on the amount of noise I've heard, based on the stuff that I've been listening to, based on the conversations that I've had, I think Adam Silver is going to be in a pretty tough spot here, where arguably the most powerful owner in the league, right? The richest owner in the league, somebody who I think Adam Silver really, really wants in the league. He's going to want this story to go away. But the 29 other owners out there, the vast majority of whom sound pretty like convinced, at least the people that I've spoken to, all like a lot of them say this is pretty far out of the norm. Um, there are enough owners, I believe, and teams out there who want to see Ballmer's feet held to the fire here because they think they got Kawhi in the first place through shady maneuvering. Um, they think that now he's kept Kawhi through some shady maneuvering. And it's going to be interesting to see, end of the day, it's going to be basically 29 or at least 20 other owners who have probably pretty hardline stances on this thing. And you're going to basically take quality over quantity here. And we're going to see kind of how that math actually plays out. And Zach Lowe did a very good job of basically outlining what it would take to, and the NBA has already said that they've begun their investigation on the matter, and we'll see what comes of that investigation. But color me a little skeptical, seeing as they investigated this exact player team relationship once already and didn't find anything. Made a big stink about, oh, we promise we're going to investigate. This is something that we take super duper seriously. And then again, right under their nose, apparently, in the years since, that shadiness has continued. So, and then, I'm also going to be a little skeptical, seeing as the NBA investigated the Jackson Hayes incident from years ago, only to find out that there was an actual video of said incident. Then they said they're going to reopen the investigation, and fuck all has come of it, right? So at the end of the day, if we're going to be talking about like the league's kind of reputation and their integrity on the matter, it's kind of sort of at stake. And if you're Adam Silver, you can't have your league's integrity being questioned, because especially at a time where gambling is, playing such a large role in sports and in sports coverage. You have gambling sites, right? They're keeping some of these RSNs alive almost single-handedly, right? In the case of FanDuel. Like, you can't have people who are putting their hard-earned money on the line gambling on you. And I'm not telling you that like this is the only thing that matters, but to a league that is very much partnered with gambling, those gambling partners are going to be pretty loud. There's going to be plenty of noise here and plenty of pressure on Adam Silver to say, all right, what the fuck is going on here? And whenever they do, and whatever comes of this investigation, it can't be a sham again. It absolutely cannot be another sham. All right. So RoboCop asks me, how would you punish the Clippers personally? I said it on the show yesterday. I don't think Ballmer should continue as owner of the Clippers. I said it yesterday. I tweeted out the clip. It did pretty well, in terms of traffic on Twitter and stuff like that. And there are plenty of Clippers fans who were real angry at me at the notion of even floating that idea out there. But clearly, Steve Ballmer does not care about the rules here, right? And I was texting back and forth with Pete. Pete and I are going to talk about this a little bit again tomorrow on the hook. But I was texting with Pete, and he was like, you don't get that rich. You don't get that wealthy by caring about rules, right? And if he brings basically that approach to the NBA, as he appears to have, right? Like this isn't even like this current story that we're talking about. It's still at the allegations phase, but he has been punished for tampering. He has been punished for cap circumvention already. Like, we've already seen him been investigated for all of this stuff already. So he clearly does not care. And he's bringing that, Harrison put it really well yesterday, that tech bro mentality where move fast and break things and then worry about the punishment or the outcome of breaking those things later. if that's how he's going to treat this, I wouldn't want to be a partner with him. If I were an owner in the another owner in the NBA, I wouldn't want to, like, I'm already iffy about the amount of money that this guy can bring to the table and how he can just thoroughly outspend us. If he's that wealthy and he's this willing to break those rules, then why would I ever think I'm operating on an even somewhat fair playing field with him? And what do you do to punish him? What are you going to fucking fine him? All right, Steve, you owe us say it's the $3.5 million that the Minnesota Timberwolves paid back in the Joe Smith situation. Okay. Steve Ballmer bought the Clippers for roughly that amount cash. No, he had 3.5 billion there or whatever it was. I'd have to look to see how much he bought. He bought the Clippers cash. He had enough cash lying around to buy the Clippers cash. Like, how do you find that guy? All right, Clippers organization. The buck stops here. You owe us 5 draft picks. Okay. We're fine. All right. We'll just completely strip our team down. Just make ourselves the most flexible that we could possibly be. And we will as in the process of stripping our team down, we'll get back some of those picks, and league will open up the cap flexibility to go out and sign whatever free agent we want. And you know what we're willing to do. So we'll probably get our guy. So, like, how do you honestly punish this team? How do you actually punish this team that does not appear to care about this and can probably work their way around any punishment that you give them anyway? The only thing I can think of here is remove their biggest advantage, and that's Steve Ballmer. And I now look, here's the thing. The last time that the league forced an owner to sell was Donald Sterling, and it was for good reason. That guy sucked, and he had those not racist allegations, but literally caught on tape saying all kinds of racist stuff. That guy had to go. And like, this is of a very different variety, obviously, of wrongdoing. But I'm going to be honest, it's probably the thing that the league cares about a little bit more. So, like, another funny, like, punishment that I saw was that, like, the wall that Steve Ballmer is really, really proud of or whatever, that had to be filled with fans of the away team, and you would basically play the game in reverse, and their free throw, because they did actually have a free throw advantage last year in terms of makes and misses from their opponents. They missed free throws more frequently at Intuit Dome than they did in other buildings. Like, if you basically flip that advantage and you turn it into a disadvantage, like, I guess you could maybe try to do that. But, like, biggest thing here is, and a lot of people that I've spoken to around the league, and a lot of the league feels this way. If this is true, and you find it to be true to the extent that you could punish somebody for cap circumvention, this isn't a court of law, right? This doesn't have to be found to the letter of the law. This has to be found to the scale at which it can be believed to be cap circumvention. If this does turn out to be that, then Adam Silver has to finally put on his big boy pants and treat this team the way that he should have treated them way back in the day. And the way that he should have, like, every time some team gets in trouble for tampering and all this stuff, it's like, here's, you owe us a couple second round picks. Okay, cool. We got Jalen Brunson. If you're the Knicks, I take my second rounders. I would have given them to Dallas anyway. Fine. We got Jalen Brunson. He's completely turned around our organization. Totally worth it. Like, this is why I've been so frustrated with Adam Silver's kind of stewardship with the league is David Stern had these teams and these owners terrified to wrong him. And these teams are like, what do you got, Adam? What are you going to do? Good luck, pal. All right. Let's go ahead and move on to a few other stories here. Cam Thomas, as I changed there on the rundown, Cam Thomas signed his qualifying offer. What's funny is I put it in the headline for the show, but I put it differently on the rundown. What an idiot. Anyway, Cam Thomas signed his qualifying offer. Now, he was kind of widely considered around the league, most likely to sign his qualifying offer. He was the furthest apart from his team in terms of contract he was expecting and contract they were willing to give. My colleague at Clutch Points, Brett Siegel, reported that the Nets were only willing to go, stick around the mid-level exception kind of number, which is in the teens. He obviously there were some reports where he's expecting twice that amount. And they didn't give him that. And now he is going to be an unrestricted free agent after the season. Also important, because he signed that qualifying offer, he cannot be traded this season, which, that's why it's really kind of interesting to watch in the Jonathan Kuminga situation. If he signs his qualifying offer, the Warriors do not want him to do that because they basically are hoping that he signs at a decent enough number that they can trade him and relinquish some of the assets that they have lost by hoping and praying that he eventually becomes a player that Joe Lacob thinks he is. In Thomas's case here, he is going to be an unrestricted free agent. He cannot be traded. And I truly don't know what I would pay him. Like, honestly, I think the Nets probably lowballed him this offseason, and they did so because unrestricted or restricted free agency has become such a bear to deal with for players. I really think next time we have any kind of CBA negotiations, the union has to go after the second apron and how it's become a hard cap. It's going to be interesting to see if there are any paper trails at that time of ownership or management telling their people, hey, you got to treat the second apron like a hard cap. Most owners, I believe, have been smart enough to just have those conversations in person or on the phone, and not present a paper trail. But as evidenced by Aspirations LLC, apparently not everybody is that smart. But they got to go after the hard cap, and they got to go after restricted free agency. It has become really, really brutal, and it's an oxymoron. It's a stupid phrase. Restricted free agency is stupid. It's not. You got to call it something else altogether if you're going to continue to tell players that it's this tool that they can use. But Cam Thomas. Here's my thing with Thomas. And I know a lot of people have made the Cam Thomas Austin Reeves comparison, and I'll do so as well. To me, the difference is Cam Thomas, I believe, has averaged like 3 and some change assists for his career. Austin is up closer to 5, or was it 5 last season? Austin is just now Thomas, I think, is a more explosive scorer, which is valuable in the NBA. But I think with Austin's ability to create for others, I think he is kind of seen as a steadier presence with a higher floor to his game than Thomas. And he also happens to have a very high ceiling, as evidenced by that game against the Pacers, where he, basically single-handedly helped beat them. So I think they won that game. I forget. I think they did. But that player type in Cam Thomas, that combo guard, bucket getter, Jordan Clarkson, Jamal Crawford, Cam Thomas, like those types of players who, yeah, definitely help you with their scoring, but don't really help you in any other real way. Those guys are kind of going the way of the dodo. And the expectation for guards is you'd better either get after it defensively or help create for others. You cannot just be a bucket getter who other teams can target defensively, because if you set aside, heavy resources to pay that player, to go and get that player, those players have become kind of unplayable in the postseason. And with a lot more teams believing they can make the postseason, and talked about this the other day with the Kamenetsky brothers, with a lot more teams making the postseason, how players perform in the playoffs, that's beginning to matter a lot more than it used to. When, if like for a lot of these teams, or for some of the, not a lot, but for some teams, the goal wasn't to win a championship. The goal was profitability. And for those teams, if your goal was profitability, having a young, a small, exciting guard who can go out and get buckets in droves, like that's the kind of thing where it would sell tickets. It would help, those exciting players would help get butts in seats, even if winning games didn't necessarily get those butts in seats. Now, winning games is kind of the way that you get those butts in seats. And as that is the case, I think some of those players, even if they can be impactful in their own way, I think there's a ceiling on what teams are willing to pay those players now. And I think Cam Thomas is I think probably one of the better examples that we're going to have of players who run up against that ceiling and have real trouble breaking through that ceiling to the type of earnings that he would have gotten, as recently as 4, 5, 6 years ago. His contract situation is going to be really interesting to watch next off season, and we'll see what type of offers he gets, what type of deal he gets. And we'll see, Austin is going to be a free agent at the same time. And I would probably pretty safely say Austin will probably get a good deal more than Thomas will, because of Austin's, he's a better defender and he is a better creator. And it's going to be interesting to see if Thomas runs up against, still hitting that type of that ceiling at like 15-ish million bucks. How he feels about, somebody like Austin jumping up and making, twice as much money, maybe even more than that, than he does next year. I still think that's in the cards. I don't think Austin is perceived in the same way that Thomas is, as a potential free agent. All right. The other news that we got, and this made me laugh out loud when it happened. Again, given the stuff that we talked about with Shams Charania earlier, he didn't break this story about Steve Ballmer and Kawhi Leonard and Aspiration LLC. He didn't break any of that stuff. What he did break, and what he made a whole bunch of, like, a big stink about, basically, was the All-Star Game format and what he'd been hearing about the All-Star Game format. If you go and you look at his timeline, bunch of tweets about that, not very many tweets about Pablo Torre's reporting. And I just think that's deeply unethical. But anyway, the thing here with the All-Star Game, and the big note about it, is that apparently the NBA is going to be compiling 3 teams. You're still going to have 24 All-Stars. You're going to have 3 teams here, 2 of which are going to be domestically based, and 1 of which is going to be an international All-Star team. Those teams will then compete against each other in some kind of round robin format, and they'll crown some winner between those 3 teams. How those teams will be picked and all that stuff, further details, I just can't really get myself to care about. I was so annoyed at this. This really bothered me. I kind of get it, because if you just make it 12 and 12, the like 10th, 11th, and 12th international player might not be as good as the 13th, 14th, and 15th American or domestic player may have been. Like, I think the talent at the top of the pool with international players is higher than that of American born players, but I think it's a much deeper pool of American born players, and that makes it really kind of tricky as far as outlining those teams. But yeah, I don't know. I just either go back to just strictly Eastern Conference, Western Conference, the best players from either of those conferences, those teams play against each other. And here again, this is where like Adam Silver kind of drives me crazy, because with David Stern, if he didn't get the sense that guys were playing very hard, he would absolutely ream guys in commissioner player union type meetings and pre all-star game meetings. And he would make it known that, like, you are here to grow the game. No, you're not going to see money from this game specifically other than your all-star bonuses and stuff like that. But by playing hard in this thing, making it entertaining, getting that rating up, and getting ratings up in general around the league, that is how you're going to grow the league, and that's how your contracts keep getting higher. And that's the part of this that drives me crazy, is that you had that awful Shea Gilgeous-Alexander quote from maybe it was a few or a couple years ago, where he was like, "Yeah, I know how they can get me to play harder. You could pay me more. You could pay me for the game." And it's like, you got an all-star bonus. Also, you're getting paid. I think Shea Gilgeous-Alexander, when he starts making his when his extension kicks in, he's going to be making like $70 million a year. And to quote Don Draper, that's what the money is for. Growing the game, growing the sport, growing the league, so that the next generation of players can make even more money. That's how this works. And that Adam Silver has completely not even struggled. He has outright failed to hammer that theme home to, albeit younger generations that prioritize different things than the prior one did. But like at the end of the day, this is kind of sort of on Silver, and he has to keep on thinking and rethinking and rethinking all of these new all-star game formats, hoping that these guys finally take it seriously, when he's not addressing the root issue. The root issue is that this younger generation just doesn't give a fuck about the game, and that's wrong. Like, it's just wrong. These guys have to care about it. Remember how hard Kobe played in those all-star games? And there were guys who were like grumbling about how hard he was playing in the all-star games back in the day. And my response every time I heard about those guys who were grumbling about how hard Kobe was playing in those all-star games, I was always like, oh, cool. So those guys are the losers. I never want those guys on the Lakers, because if you pick and choose when you're going to like play hard, then you're going to run into some guy eventually who plays hard all the time, and you're going to lose to that guy, because work ethic and give a bleep, that's a habit. That's a tool. That is something that you develop over years. And if you pick and choose when you're going to develop that, or, hone it, or actually apply that skill, you're gonna get bleeped up. You're gonna get your butt kicked by somebody who doesn't look at it that way. And so it's like I was kind of excited about the international, like the Ryder Cup thing. That was something that I've been kind of calling for. I was hoping it would just be the two teams, and you would have these teams play really hard against each other, like you watch those Ryder Cups. It's one of my favorite events whenever it comes up. It's not every year, but it's one of my absolute favorite events, because of how much those guys care, and because of how, like, the lore of that game, and the international and the domestic belief in that game, and the belief in the event, that makes that game as special, or that event as special as it is. And at the end of the day, it doesn't matter what the league does to try to make this thing special. Yep, there's my son. Hi, kiddo. You're awake. There's Miles right there. You can, and oh, cool. Yeah, Avery too. Avery, I need you to take Miles out of here, okay? But you guys can come say hi first. You want to say hi?
Hi, everyone.
Miles, you want to say hi?
Hi.
Say hi.
Hi.
There we go. All right. I'll see you guys in a little bit. I love you. Unbelievable. But anyway, what I was saying is that like it doesn't matter what format that Adam Silver picks here. It's not going to matter until these guys really truly care. I realize I missed something here. My buddy, let's see, my buddy here from my old colleague at the Locked On Network, he reported that Kawhi was actually getting more and that he was actually getting closer to $50 million combined with from Aspiration Inc. or LLC. And that's important. And this is something that I think we're going to come back to at some point. But that's important because I'd been wondering why there was a discrepancy between Steve Ballmer's investment into Aspiration LLC and what Kawhi was owed by Aspiration LLC. And it turns out that nope, actually, it seems pretty close to being dollar for dollar, which makes this look even worse. So everything that I said earlier about that situation, take this into account, and there's even more reason, I believe, for the NBA to seriously investigate the matter. But yeah, great job there by John to John Corrales of Locked On Celtics to find that out. All right. Yeah, I'm going to go ahead and end this thing here, seeing as my kids now know that I'm recording and they can get into the office. Thank you, everybody, for tuning in. Thank you, everybody, for stopping by and giving your thoughts on the matter. I know, I'm sorry, Dr. Funkology, never praise a Celtic. Technically not a Celtic, but just to make sure, I'll play an extra one of these just to make good on that matter. Or on the subject, because yeah, I don't want to say nice things about people from Boston. Actually, I got time for a story. There was a time I went to Boston for a wedding of now it was a long time ago. But we were in the wedding was in Rhode Island, and I was able to make a stop in Boston. I have a really, really good friend of mine who lives in Boston, originally from California. I went and had dinner with him and his wife and his kid. And while I was there, I was in an Uber or whatever, and this guy, the Uber driver, was listening to John's show, Locked On Celtics, on his radio. And while he was driving, he kept on like looking back and then kind of looking back and then looking back there and then looking back. And I had said a couple of things to him, right? Like, is this for Anthony Irwin? Thank you very much. How you holding up? All that stuff. And he goes, and finally he goes like, I'm sorry, man. I'm listening to Locked On Celtics. And I, by the way, I would appear on Locked On Celtics every time that there was any kind of a Celtics Lakers story crossover. I would appear on Locked On Celtics. So he goes like, you sound familiar. You look a little familiar. Are you the guy who hosts Locked On Lakers? And I was like, yeah, I'm Anthony Irwin. I appreciate your support of at least the network. I can't imagine you listen to my show very often. And he's kind of looking up in the rear view, and he goes, I gotta say, not a fan. And I was like, I respect it, I guess. Thank you for, again, I guess, supporting at least John's show. But yeah, we wound up like it was a pleasant ride, and we laughed about the matter. And by the time I got out of the car, he was like, all right, you're a decent man. And I was like, yeah, thank you. So shouts to John, shouts to Locked On Celtics and the whole network. I wouldn't be where I am in my career without that first opportunity that David gave me with Locked On Lakers way back in the day. But all right, that is going to do it here for this episode of the Lakers Lounge podcast. Have a great rest of your day. Make somebody else's, and I will talk to you tomorrow with Pete on the hook.